Couple guys to remember, of course, Drew Lock back for another starting season in Columbia, Missouri. If you look at just his flatline statistics, they're a bit inflated based on some of the lesser competition out of conference that Mizzou played. He struggled against the better competition and racked up a huge yardage and total touchdown amounts against the lesser competition, but he's got a top-notch running back and wide receiver back, both with 1,000 yards coming into 2017. Kyle Shermer is a guy that like the Vandy offenses we've seen in recent years, even the successful ones under James Franklin, run first, run heavy, throw it 17 to 20 times, but suddenly, bam, Vandy found a passing offense late in the season, and Shermer lit up the likes of Tennessee and Ole Miss and Auburn down the stretch, and had some big late season games in November. So it will be intriguing to see whether Shermer can carry that kind of momentum and has turned into a different player that we will see from start to finish in 2017. Malik Zaire, remember seeing him going all the way back to the 2014 postseason against LSU. It was a Notre Dame upset of the Bayou Bengals at the Music City Bowl. He came in relief of then it was Everett Golson, and had a huge day, like a 12 for 14 day. The lefty hit on some fourth down passes on a late drive to upset LSU. Since then, he's been on and off the field, only to be unseated by Deshaun Kaiser, who was just flat out the better player and turned out to be a more productive player at Notre Dame, and Zaire trying to get a fresh start there in Gainesville under Jim McElwain, who's known for his tutelage of quarterbacks. Shea Patterson in relief of Chad Kelly may be a blessing in disguise for Ole Miss fans that Patterson gets in against the likes of Texas A&M, Vandy, and Mississippi State late in the season and acquitted himself rather well, almost 900 yards in those 3 games, 6 touchdowns and 3 picks. So I'll get to my top 5 that's similar but not exact to yours, Mike. So I left Nick Fitzgerald despite the just eye-popping rushing numbers that you mentioned, and I rate these guys as complete players as well. They're just not passers. They are playing a position, and if they're able to produce yardage and first downs and points with their legs, that should be credited to them, just like if they're throwing it. So it's not the top 5 passers or throwers, it's the top 5 quarterbacks. But Fitzgerald struggled mightily against Alabama, which most people do, but tack on LSU and Auburn and some of the better teams on the schedule. He put up some wicked, brutal passing statistics in those games. And to your point, Mike, the secondaries on those teams, especially the first 3 that I mentioned, superior to the wide receiver play that he had on the outside. So he may have been victimized by not much separation downfield or not a whole lot of time to throw the football. Dan Mullen made a comment after they walked off the field, narrowly escaping Miami of Ohio in the St. Petersburg Bowl with a blocked extra point, that Nick Fitzgerald has to progress as a passer, has to make better decisions, has to get more accurate for Mississippi State to challenge, of course, in the West. So my top 5 goes Jarrett Stidham, assuming he wins the job, or it could be Sean White, as you mentioned there. Stidham mopped up for Seth Russell a couple years ago. Then he gained the starting job late in the season and really inflated his stats based on the mop-up duty against inferior foes. But late in the season against a couple really good defenses, Big 12 defenses, but still good defenses for them. Kansas State and OU, he racked up some big numbers. Jarrett Stidham's going to put some life, I think, into that Auburn passing game. Jake Bentley, I like. I'm projecting more so than taking the 2016 track record. Projecting to 2017, I really liked what I saw out of Jake Bentley and his development. Put up huge numbers late in the season. He's got a veteran receiving core that he's worked with now for a year in Deebo Samuel and Brian Edwards, and add on to that the number 1 player out of South Carolina, wide receiver Ortre Smith. We could see big things out of Jake Bentley this season behind a veteran offensive line. At number 3, again, projection here, Jacob Eason. I can see why he completed just 55% of his passes last year. Yes, he has a gun. He has all the talent in the world. He's pretty much a scattershot thrower at this point, but he's got a superior ground game with Sony Michel and Nick Chubb to back him up. He's not going to have to carry the offense and throw it 50 times. I expect Jacob Eason, with all that talent and the defense in support of him, as you mentioned, Mike, to really play to his strength and to put him in a position of comfort in most of these games for Georgia this season. Austin Allen, 25-15 touchdown to pick ratio, but I think he played from behind and threw a lot of picks in some of those shootouts, Alabama in particular, where Arkansas was completely outclassed, but they were always within striking distance, 14 to 17 points, and he was chucking it up and throwing a lot of picks in that game in particular, but there were a few others like that as well. And then in number one, Jalen Hurts. And like you, I didn't necessarily jump into this thinking, okay, Jalen Hurts is the best quarterback in the SEC, and then I'm going to fill it out from there. I do credit him with walking off the field with a win in the national championship game to a certain extent, because he never got the ball back in his hands to try to win the game. The last two times he had the ball in his hands, he scored touchdowns against a very formidable Clemson defense, and he did all he could do. It didn't always look pretty, but he produced points against a defense that shut out Ohio State the week before and put together 2 fourth-quarter touchdown drives when he had to. So Jalen Hurts, you would expect, would take a leap as a passer this season, going from a true freshman to a sophomore campaign in 2017.